Welcome back to this week's episode of Hormones, Metabolism, and You. I'm your host, Dr. Cassie Smith. I'm a functional medicine endocrinologist based out of Oklahoma City. Today, I have a fascinating episode for you on rewiring your brain to overcome anxiety, depression, and hormonal imbalance. I have an amazing guest, Dr. Caroline Leaf. She is a clinical neuroscientist and a communication pathologist who is just amazing. So I'm going to teach you on this episode, we are going to teach you how to rewire your brain to overcome anxiety and depression, which will ultimately help you heal your hormones by using the power of your mind. Dr. Leaf, like I said, is a neuroscientist and a communication pathologist. She has 19 best-selling books. One of them was released this year called Help in a Hurry. And she is also the podcast host of Cleaning Up the Mental Mess with over 50,000 downloads. Now, this episode, you guys, this is an amazing episode. What we talked about in this episode was the critical difference between your mind and your brain. Okay. So why understanding that difference will help change the way you heal yourself and ultimately help heal your hormones. We talked about what is neuroplasticity. So your brain is changing whether you want it to or not. So how do we direct those changes to be impactful and help our hormones and our health as opposed to hurting it? She talked about the 5-step neurocycle process so that you can understand what is going on and how to rewire toxic thought patterns in just 15 minutes a day. We also talked about the 63-day rule for breaking bad habits, why 21 days is not enough, and what happens at day 36 that causes depression to actually spike and a lot of times causes people to fall off the bandwagon. The truth about anxiety and depression, they're not diseases, they're messengers. And their message is that it's not a Prozac deficiency, but there's actually a wiring issue in your brain. And I believe it's tied to your gut. So we talk all about that and how your thoughts directly affect your hormones. There's a mind-gut hormone connection that most doctors miss, which I think is so important. So if you want to break free from anxiety, if you want to balance your hormones naturally, if you want to understand why you show up the way you do in life, this episode is a must listen to. What you're going to learn will empower you to take control of your health, your mental health, your physical health. It'll transform you physically after you fix your mental health, and it will help you do the same for the people that you love. Stick around until the end to learn about Dr. Leaf's powerful research showing how mind management improves everything from thyroid function to weight loss, and why fixing your mind is the key to fixing your hormones. I hope that you all enjoyed this episode as much as I did recording it, and we'll put all the information on how to connect with Dr. Caroline Leaf in the show notes. And if you have not gotten her book that came out this year recently, you need to do it. It will be life-changing. So here we go. Hello, welcome to this summit episode, Hormones and Mental Health, Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, and ADHD. I'm your host, Dr. Cassie Smith, and I have with me today Dr. Caroline Leaf. She is a communication pathologist, and she's going to talk to us about how anxiety and depression can play into our hormone issues. She's actually an audiologist, a pathologist, or she's a communication pathologist, an audiologist, and a clinical neuroscientist specializing in research in psychoneurobiology. She's published 19 best-selling books in 24 languages, has over 50 million downloads on her award-winning podcast, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess, and over 9 million downloads on YouTube. She runs research trials in mental health and publishes in scientific journals. She speaks to diverse audiences around the world, including about neuroscience and medical conferences, and also talks on TEDx. So thank you for joining us on this Hormone Summit. I'm very excited to have you. There's so much chatter currently just in the world about, mindset and how mindset is so important for our health, and how, mindset leads or helps with anxiety and depression. So it'll either, lead you to anxiety and depression if your mindset's bad, or it can help prevent anxiety and depression. So can you kind of tell us, I guess, maybe start with what got you interested in this space that you're in?
Well, Cassie, that's a long. I've been at it for 40 years now, and I've been doing research in clinical trials. I've practiced for 25 years, and what interested me most and got me in the field was the fact that we need to understand more about the mind. And when I was trained in the 80s, there was a lot of emphasis on the mind and the brain, and understanding that these were separate things. They're not the same thing. And then that changed in the mid 90s with the advent of MRI technology. And for the last 40 years, there's been a huge emphasis on, well, 35, 40 years, a huge emphasis on brain, 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 and brain and mind being the same thing. So my interest was very much in helping people to understand the mind, understand what thoughts are, to understand that the mind and brain and body are separate but work together as a unit, but run by the mind. The mind is our energy and aliveness, and if we understand mind, which is 99% of who we are, that's what actually drives the body. So the fact that your heart's beating, your hormones are working, all of that is if you're dead, nothing's happening. And your mind is basically incorporating your aliveness. So the way you manage your mind is going to have a massive influence on how the brain functions, how the body functions, and by the same token, how our hormones function, which specifically, this particular summit. So that interest has been fascinating. That flow and that interest in the mind brain body connection has been around for thousands of years. It's nothing new. But we did go through a period in the last 40 years or so where there's been less understanding of mind and more focus on brain and body, more focus on the physical. And so I've tried to, it's been my big area of interest to try and reconnect that and help people understand more about the mind.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So can you explain to people what neuroplasticity, like, what does that mean?
Absolutely. So neuro stands for brain and plasticity means to change. And so everyone thinks when you hear the word neuroplasticity, and there's so much in the media about it as well now, people think, well, it's the brain changing itself. But the brain can't change itself. The brain is changed by something else. And the thing that changes the brain is also going to change the body. So neuroplasticity is the ability that we have as humans with our thinking, our thought life, how we think and feel and choose, that generates an energy that goes into the brain and the body and changes the brain and the body. Now, when we're alive, from the moment we wake up in the morning to the moment we go to sleep, and while we're asleep, we are processing life through our mind into our brain and our body. And that processing of life means that energy is being put into the brain and the body, and that stimulates changes in our genes and our chemistry, and the biochemistry of the brain and the body, and that then makes structural changes in the brain and the body. The neuroplasticity is the result of the mind changing the brain and the body constantly. And that neuroplasticity, it's called the neuroplastic paradox, can go in both directions. Because all day long we're experiencing life, and all day long we are having all these things happening. And whether you like it or not, your mind is changing, your brain is changing, your body is changing. That's psychoneurobiology. But what we can do, which is really great in terms of mental health and so on, and hormones and just being a human, is that we can learn to direct neuroplasticity. So we can learn to influence the change. Why would we want to do it? Well, whatever you experience becomes built into the network of the mind, brain, body, and whatever becomes established in that network as a habit, that's what drives how you function. And it also influences how your body functions. So if we've got a lot of things that we're not managing, a lot of stressors, a lot of issues, a lot of traumas, a lot of habits, bad habits that we develop, if we're not managing those, we're constantly feeding into strengthening networks in our mind brain body connection that are driving us in a way that is going to affect our mental health, that feeds back into the body and affects our hormones and our physical functioning.
Okay. So there's this like 5-step process, is that right? With like a neurocycle, there's a 5-step process and how that works. Is that correct?
Yes. So what I developed, oh, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
No, so explain to us like that 5-step process.
Absolutely. So about 38 years ago, I was working a lot with traumatic brain injured patients and people with Parkinson's and autism and learning disabilities. And I soon discovered that we were trained to help people to compensate. So they were battling heart attack, people that had strokes, phase, and all these different kinds of things. And the kinds of therapy techniques and the kinds of things that we were trained to help people with didn't they were stimulating neuroplasticity, but it wasn't making the changes and empowering people to make the changes that I would like to have seen. It was more one of, well, your brain damage, that's it, there's nothing you can do, which we know now is not the truth. I mean, that was back in the 80s, from the mid 90s, that whatever you do with your mind is directing changes in the brain, and your brain is always changing, your body is always changing, as I was saying, in a good or a bad direction. So what I wanted to do is to understand how does a thought form? because thoughts are the encapsulation of our experiences. So we have life, life's happening around us, and all these experiences of life become processed through our mind and become thoughts. Those thoughts wire into the mind and body connection, and those are the things that are driving us. So essentially, I wanted to understand the process of how that happens, because if there's a neuroplastic paradox, which means that if we are always changing, whether we like it or not, if our mind and body network's always changing, and if we don't control that change, our change can go in the wrong direction. So we can then develop bad habits and mental health can get worse and that kind of thing. I wanted to understand, how does this process occur and can we intervene? Is there a way of us stepping in and managing this process and reversing it? And that's what the Neurocycle is. It's gone through various different names, but the name for the last 5 years, we've called it the Neurocycle, because it's cycles that you go through in helping to identify the patterns in your life, how you're showing up in your life. What are your emotions and behaviors and perspectives and bodily sensations, that combination of signals. How are you showing up? What is and where is that coming from? Because how you show up isn't who you are. Depression isn't a disease. It isn't who you are. It is a signal that something's going on. It's an emotional signal that something's going on. If there's something going on in your body when you feel those sensations, it's telling us information. So I wanted to understand, how can we look at how we show up as humans and then reverse engineer that according to the process of how it got there in the first place. And that's what the Neurocycle is. And for very complex science, I simplified it down into it's like a 5-step process that we go through as information experience comes into our mind brain body connection, and how it becomes a network that drives us. In other words, how it turns into a habit, and then how we can reverse that process. And that's what the Neurocycle is. So it's basically a system for how we can find out how we're showing up, become very observant and self-regulated, and then change that. You can't change what's happened to you, but you can change what it looks like inside those networks, and therefore what's driving you. And therefore you can, whatever's happened in your past, whatever's happening in your present, whatever experience you have and all the uncertainty of life that affects us, we can actually identify how that is affecting us, track it back to the thought behind it, which is the experience, deconstruct that, reconstruct that, and change how it plays out into our future. So that's a lot of mind work that actually changes the way that the body functions, and then also influences things like our hormones. And that's basically what the 5-step neurocycle process does.
So there's a way to go back and change how your mind will process that?
Yes. Yes. So neuroplasticity is essentially how your mind is processing life into your networks. And the more you think about something, the more you process it into the networks, and the stronger the network becomes. So for every experience that we have, and just think of it, we have trillions of experiences through our lifetime. Those experiences that we focus on become these networks. Those networks, when they are stabilized over time into habits, they drive us. So what we can do is reverse that process. Because if we have a negative experience, like a trauma, for example, in childhood or adulthood or whatever, or you have a bad habit that you just get into, which we all do, those become toxic networks. Those networks are they're not healthy networks. And if you've done them a lot, and they're a habit, it means that you practice them. It means that they're very strong. And that means that they're driving you. Now, if our whole, as a medical practitioner, that our mind-brain-body connection, or body, is wired for survival. We're not wired to die. We're wired to try and survive. In the neuroscience world, we call it being wired for love. So essentially, what our bodies, mind-brain-body connection is trying to do is identify those patterns of behavior that have become habits, that are disruptive to our mental functioning and therefore our physical functioning, what those are, and then rewire those. And that's what we're able to do. So you'll never forget the trauma, but you can take the strength and energy and power out of the trauma, for example, therefore change how it plays out into the future. And in doing that, that's where the psychoneurobiology comes in, mind, which is the psycho part, the 99% of who we are. As you work on the mind, that then changes how the structures and the energy to flow in the mind, brain, and body connection, and therefore how it plays out in our life. And that's how we can go through therapy, go through different processes, and we can then see, oh, I was like that, now I'm like this. So the neurocycle is empowering people to do it yourself, because I'm all for therapy and counseling, we need that, but you live with yourself 24/7. You are the one that's driving your life. And so you can't phone up a therapist or counselor in the middle of the night, or when you're in the shower and having a panic attack, or in the middle of a meeting and you're really anxious. You've got to know how to manage your mind in the moment. You've got to improve your self-regulation skills. And that doesn't mean you're going to solve all problems immediately. But if you recognize the signals, you can then get a handle by using the neurocycle on how you react in that moment. And then you can take time at a later, next day or something like that, to work on. If you recognize, hey, I keep reacting in the same way, this is a pattern in my life, then you can spend time deconstructing that. And that does take time. You can use the neurocycle in the moment very quickly to help you calm down in a meeting, or calm down in a fiery relationship situation, or deal with something that life throws at you, which it does every day. But then, in order to really change those networks, it takes at least 63 days. We often hear 21 days to break a habit, but it actually takes consistent working daily for around 63 days, 3 cycles of 21, to really rewire those neuroplastic networks into a healthy version. Otherwise, it's half done, and then we get frustrated.
So, so you kind of talked about the brain and the mind and how they're a little different. So you're saying, so explain that again. So the mind is how you perceive everything else, and the brain is what it's perceiving the world around you. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Sort of. Okay, so the brain is a physical organ, as we know, and the body is physical. The mind also has a level of physicality to it, but it's energy. Okay, so it's an energy force that goes. If you do an EKG or an ECG or an EEG or sonogram, you're picking up the energy, picking up various different things that we can do in the body. We can pick up the different energy forces in the body. Okay, so mind is an energy force that drives the mental part of us, and it drives the physiological part of us. So when someone dies, that energy force goes, and people's heart stops, and their brain stops, and their body dies, and their body disintegrates. So the mind is a life force, and it incorporates consciousness and all those big words, consciousness and emotions and thoughts and all those things. It's got different levels, etc., etc. But it's basically a field of energy that is unique to each person. And every experience we have, think of it like the mind, like a thought field, like a thought field, a field around you and through you. And every experience that you have is forming, like if you think of the sky, think of clouds in the sky. Think of every experience growing into like a cloud in this thought field. And so as you experience something like this conversation, it's the mind energy that then first processes what I'm saying and builds that into a mind network, an energy cluster. And then that gets put into the brain and the body simultaneously. And that then changes the networks, build the network into the brain and builds networks into the cells of the body, which is why if you're stressed, you feel that stress in your body. If you record a trauma, you can feel your heart fluttering. There's a whole connection between the mind, brain, and body. So the mind is the energy force. The brain is a receiver, a transmitter, a storage unit, literally and all the different parts of the brain are designed to respond to the mind in different ways. So we often hear about the amygdala and the fear response in the amygdala. The amygdala can't do anything, but when we feel fear in our mind, then the amygdala is activated to with the front part of the brain and different parts of the brain, and the different parts of the brain are activated by the mind, and that's how we are able to then respond in life to things. So the brain is a physical filter, and the body is like a physical filter. The mind is the force that keeps the filter and the heart and the endocrine system and everything working. It's quite a big concept to process. But if you just think of it as mind is your aliveness, that's probably the easiest way. It's who you are, it's how you think, feel, and choose. It's you. It's Cassie, it's Caroline, it's whoever's listening. That's who you are, how you think, feel, choose, that energy. When you die, your body just disintegrates. So it's that energy of life that incorporates consciousness and the non-conscious mind and thoughts and energy and responses and emotions, and all that stuff is mind. But it's an energy that we can use things like quantum physics and classical Newtonian physics to explain. And then that's what makes the brain work. So the brain is not generating or doing anything, it's responding. The brain is a responder to the mind. The body is a responder to the mind.
So really a lot of these things that women struggle with that we're kind of talking about in the summit, the anxiety, the depression, the ADHD, all these things that happen when our hormones change or for whatever reason, is really more a mind issue than a brain issue. The brain just kind of processing what's happening, but it's the sometimes maybe the toxic or negative things that we say to ourselves or that we see or just the environments that we're in. Obviously, some of it's a hormonal change, but a lot of these issues are probably a mind issue then.
Absolutely, and yeah, absolutely, and what we're in a sort of world view or a zeitgeist where we feel that we have to have a biological cause for something like anxiety and depression in order to make it valid, and that's so unfortunate because your mind is as physical. It's a physical thing. It's a different type of physicality, but your mind is what's driving the brain and the body. So yes, a lot of what we're experiencing is in the mind. That does obviously if you have certain medications, that's a biological change. If you have a traumatic brain injury, if you have a some sort of neurological damage, if there's some genetic disorder like Huntington's or something that's passed through the bloodline, but that's only around about 1 to 5% of the reasons why we have issues. Obviously, food, whatever you ingest, if we ingest foods and things, medications, that can change our biologically chemical our body, and then that feeds back into the mind. But even your mind, what the research has shown is that even for example, I work with quite a few endocrinologists, and one of the people on my team, what she's found is that if someone's got, for example, thyroid issues, she'll have someone with a really just a simple example, and I'm using it because I'm an endocrinologist, so this will probably be something you can relate to. But how she explains it so well, and I'm going to quote her, is that she has two patients in front of her. One is both with thyroid issues, one with a really major problem, the other one with a mind problem. The one with a major problem, because their attitude and their understanding and their mind management is so much more developed, and their mindsets, this all that kind of thing. The mind is working so much more efficiently. When medication works better, everything about the healing works better, so they heal better. The one with a lesser problem but a negative attitude, they'll do worse than the one with a worse problem. And I mean, this is something that's quite well documented, in not just the world of endocrinology, but in the world of medicine, where there's a lot of research in back cancer, all that kind of thing. And I'm not saying it's people's fault. I'm not really, it's life as humans. What we need is an awareness of this is not a blame game. This is not how you can't manage your mind. Your mind, we all need to manage our mind because our mind is the driving force. So when we recognize the power of the mind, we know how to then look after our physical body so efficiently. And so that's what I'm saying. So we need to give much more weight to not just trying to look for a biological cause, but look at there's a combination, because whatever we go through in our mind is going to change your brain. It's going to change your body. So if you're having a lot of trauma in your life, it will affect your hormones. There's no ways it won't. There's no way that constantly not dealing with stuff, and not even if it's hard to deal with stuff. Where people that have got histories of abuse, and maybe a marriage or something like that, where there's a lot of abuse and they can't get out of it. They're stuck in a situation. That constant abuse is being processed by the mind into the body, and you will see changes in the body's biological function, the way that the structure of the brain that is wired into the brain in an imbalanced way. So we even see that the proteins fold incorrectly. That there's an imbalance in those networks, a biochemical imbalance. As soon as you've got an imbalance in the networks of the brain, you're going to have an imbalance in the body, and that's going to create right through the hypothalamus all the way through, and then the entire endocrine system is going to be affected. So it's one of educating people to understand that my mind does impact my brain and my body. And if I can work on my mind, you still have to deal with the damage that's occurred in the brain and the body. We need medicine. I'm all for medicine to have that, because we inevitably, as humans, we don't know how to manage everything at the time. So we inevitably are going to damage ourselves without even realizing it. But that's why we need to work with medicine, but we also need to work with our mind. To the combination, and we don't pay enough attention to our mind. We're really, really good at dealing with the biological, but we don't spend enough time working on our mind, and we need both.
Okay. So then tell me about habit formation, right? So like, where do we go wrong when we're forming habits? Like what part of this gets, I guess, deranged, or when we're trying to make habits and we end up making bad habits? And maybe can you talk to us about like that neuropsychological work and give us an example as to how somebody could like rewire a habit or make a new habit if they're very anxious or depressed?
Absolutely. So the just okay. So the big thing is that when you have an experience, like just for example, the first time you just said something once, the chances of you remembering it are not very good because your brain will be led by your mind through certain memories, and memories cluster together to form thoughts. So for something to stick and become a habit that drives you, because habits are the things that drive us. Whatever you're doing all the time is a habit. Every behavior pattern that we have, whether it is going to the gym, cleaning your teeth, responding to your spouse in a certain way, doing your work in a certain way, the whole lot, the way you run your life is based on habits. So habits are experiences that we practice. And so what we see from the research is that the more you practice something which is pathological, the more you're going to make it stronger. And so we see that the networks then change. You think of the first in the realm of the mind. If you think of the first time that you do something, it being a tiny little flimsy cloud, and a tiny little weak little network, like a tiny little tree that or seed that's just been planted in this tiny little plant that you could easily just squash, and in your body just these tiny little plants that are weak. But as you water the plant, wherever it grows and gets bigger. So if you use the plant analogy for how it grows, it's kind of what's happening with the mind-brain-body connection. So a habit forms by us constantly feeding it this energy. You keep thinking about something, you keep ruminating on something, you keep thinking about what that person said, what they did, how it happened. You create the scenarios in your mind of they're doing this, and you don't even know they're doing that, but you're really good at thinking, well, they said this, so it means this, so they're going to do that, and then and as you do this over time, you are feeding that energy, pouring it onto the network, and it's growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's in a negative direction. It's negative plasticity happening, and that network becomes toxic in the brain, and it also goes every cell of the body. And we have 37 to 100 trillion cells of the body. Okay, so over what we've seen is that there's three phases that we go through in building a habit. The first 21 days, which everyone's so familiar with, is where we are very into this thing. We're very aware and very like practicing and experiencing. And if it's something that we're trying to work on, it's very hard. It's very hard facing stuff, and it's like feels like so much work takes longer. When you reach a point around about 21 to 28 days where you think, hey, no, I think I'm getting there. I think I can see where I want to be. I think I can see the change. I can start feeling that I'm doing this more often in every direction, whether it's detoxing something or whether it's building something, breaking down a habit. Around 21 to 28 days, we start feeling that it's okay. There's a whole healing journey that we go through. And if we stop around 21 days, it's a danger zone because between 21 and 28 days is a massive flip that happens where it's like you watered your plant to a point, but now you stop watering your plant, it just dies. And so you have to keep going. And as you keep going, there's ups and downs. So some days you'll feel better and other days you won't. But if you know that they are, and this is what I've tracked with my work, do the neurocycle of 63 days, you can literally be worked on studies where we can show that around 4 days you'll feel more like this, 14 days like this, 21 like this, whatever the midpoint is, like around 36 days, we suddenly, if you're working on something that's toxic, around 36 to 42 days, there's this massive insight that occurs. But it's an insight that actually will generally increase depression and anxiety, those emotions because you're suddenly seeing, wow, look at what I missed. You get the scope, you're getting a massive insight into the scope of what has happened in your life because of that tragedy or that habit or that toxic trauma. And so, but because you at that point, it's a grief, it's a grieving that is very wise. It's one of a learning situation. It's a one of an awareness. And so you carry on. You get through the dip and you carry on. And then you hit the point at around 59 to 63 days where you see, okay, I've got this. Depression and anxiety are not bad things. They're giving me information. I see now where I'm going. I've got a plan of action in place. When I'm triggered again, this is my new behavior. And I'm now seeing more areas that this affected. And then you start another cycle. So this is an ongoing thing. And if you cut the healing journey short at any one of those, any point, any day along that 63 days, you actually will then get frustrated because you'll remember what you did and you'll think, now what's wrong with me? I did all of this, I did all of that, I've followed this, but I'm still back at that point. I can see where I want to be, but I can't get there. And then people go kind of round and round and they get more depressed and that kind of thing. And so we want to try and avoid that. We want people to understand that depression, anxiety, these things, they're messengers. They're giving us information. And the healing journey, as we all know, the hero's journey, it's an up and down journey. So what we've tracked with our research and what I've built into the Neurocycle is this healing journey. Because if you know what's coming up, like if I know I'm working on something really hard and I know at 21 days I could potentially think I'm okay, but I'm not. If I know at day 36 I'm going to get this huge grief explosion of insight that's kind of overwhelming, I can put some things in place, like make sure I see my therapist that day, or make sure I have a loved one that I can go out for coffee with and talk to that day. So you plan for these things, and this is an ongoing thing because, Cassie, not only do we have one issue we're working on, we have numerous issues. We never stop working on issues. Plus, new issues are coming all the time. And the beauty of the Neurocycle is that you're always working on something. So you work on one thought, and a thought is made up of a lot of details. Like a rain cloud is made up of a lot of drops of water. A thought is made up of a lot of details, which is all the memories of the experience. So you work on one thought with all its details for 63 days, and then you start another thought, related or unrelated, depending on where you're at. But you can also use the neurocycle in the moment, which I mentioned earlier on. So you can literally, let's say, for example, that you're in a meeting. And I mean, let's take our example. We were battling with the sound. The sound was going crazy. We were battling to get the sound going, and that's quite a challenging situation because we needed to do this interview. So I did a quick neurocycle in my mind, where the first step is gathering awareness, where you basically gathering awareness very unemotionally of what unemotionally is in a self-regulated very compassionate way of how are you feeling. Okay, there's a level of concern because this interview is about to happen. What's going on? Confusion, maybe a little bit of worry. So you just acknowledge it. I feel those emotions. Where am I feeling in my body? My shoulders were tensing up. Where am I? And what is my behaviors? I'm trying everything that I can to try and solve the problem. So are you. And what is my perspective? Gosh, Riverside for me. Well, Riverside's doing it again, but we solve this problem. And then immediately you reflect on that. So, okay, I'm feeling a little worked up because this is important. You need to get this interview done. That's the reflect step. Why? The who, the what, the when, the where, the why. So you first gather awareness of the emotions, of the behaviors, of the perspectives, of the body sensations. 4 little sentences. Then you say, why am I feeling this? You ask the W8 questions. Then you do a bit of a mind storm, which you can do mentally if it's a quick one. And that mind storm could be, what are all the problems, troubleshooting. For me, it was troubleshooting. What did I do in the past to try and solve this problem? And then the 4th step is what you call a recheck step, where you say, okay, how can I see this differently? What could we do differently? And you and I discuss some options. Could we do check? What did you do? Did it work? Let's try finding a microphone. Let's see if we can make it whatever. So we look at this differently, and then action was we made it work. We actually followed through on those thoughts. You did something your side, I did something my side. We took an action. Now that's a silly example, but in that covered the whole process of what happened. And to get myself in a place of calmness, I could whip through that in a minute. So the neurocycle is getting order out of chaos in your mind. Because if we allow our mind to go all over the place, we are in any situation, whether it's something as simple as what we've just discussed now, whether it's someone who, maybe a family member who triggers you and you love them, but there's maybe a relationship issue and they say something and boom, there's fireworks. How do you keep yourself in a state of calmness so you can have wisdom so that that doesn't escalate into an ongoing relationship problem? And so you can do a quick neurocycle in a moment of quickly acknowledging, you can be looking straight ahead at the person and you can quickly go whip through the gathering awareness of the 4 signals, reflecting quickly on them, doing a little mind storm mentally, then rechecking and doing an active reach. When you do it daily, you sit down for about 15 minutes, and I've got an app, the Neurocycle app is on iTunes and Google Play, and there's a web version. I've also got books. Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess is my most recent that explains the process. But when you do it daily to work on, let's say, a pattern. So what I just described was how you use it in the moment. If there's a pattern in your life, like maybe you're always having the same issue with your partner, or you find yourself always getting anxious in meetings when certain situations arise, you see this is happening on a regular basis. There's a pattern here. Then you want to sit down for 63 days. Pattern means you've got to have it. And you now need to daily work through the 5 steps for about minutes a day for the first 21 days, and then the balance of the 63 days, the other 42, just 5 minutes a day. And you just work through the 5 steps. Don't solve it in one day, but a little bit each day. That's how habits work. You break it down and build each day. A little bit of breaking down, a little bit of building up, a little bit each day. And you get into a flow, and then that after 63 days changes. Now, people might be thinking, I don't have 63 days. Let me say this. Your brain is changing all the time by your mind. Your mind's forever changing your brain and your body, which is the plastic paradox. The thing is you can direct the change. So if you're not directing the change, it's still changing, but in the wrong direction. So you're actually getting worse. So whether you like it or not, you're changing. So you may as well direct the change. And that's essentially what the Neurocycle is doing. It's directing the change. Now, the less chaos in your mind, the less chaos in your body, the less chaos in things like your hormones. It's essentially the flow. So we've shown that in our research, how hormones, I mean, there's a lot of different things, but we're talking quite a lot about hormones in this particular summit. We've shown evidence of hormones changing with mind management in these periods of 9-week cycles.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful for people to hear. We at Modern Endocrine, we have this like 10-step approach we do for ultimate health. And, we start with cell membranes and we start with, gut health and things like that. But I do tell people after you get through simple things like that in nutrition and exercise and light, like mindfulness, mindset, meditation is so important. And I'm actually working on a book right now, and the whole book's concept is how all of our hormones go together. And I have the whole section on how stress affects your gut. And a lot of it comes from your mind, and how when your gut is affected by stress, it affects your vagus nerve. And then that ultimately can cause leaky gut, which can cause hormone issues. And yeah, so I mean, I do think that, and I think that, I have a health coach, and she does give people like a lot of tips and advice on stress. So some of the things you were talking about, and just ways to mitigate stress and ways to reform habits and ways to get out of bad habits. And I think that this is, mental health in general is something that in the United States we don't focus enough on. And so I think that's probably why, you've written all, like, this very successful podcast. People want to learn about this because, to your point, there are things you can do to kind of rewire that, right? Like this system we have. And once you fix your mind, so many things start to fall in place. Your sleep. That's what I tell my patients all the time. Like, people come to me and they want to lose 30 pounds. You know this. I want to lose 30 pounds. I want to lose 30 pounds. But they want to just starve themselves and not do the work. It's like, well, no, why did we gain the 30 pounds to begin with? Like, let's think about this. Are we mindlessly eating? Are we eating to comfort ourselves? Are we eating because we have trauma? Are we eating, because we're anxious? Like, you have to work through all of that. And then once you start fixing that, you start rewiring habits in your brain. You fix your gut, you fix your hormones, you fix your mind, you fix your sleep. Then, I had a lady who came in this last week, and, we've been working together for 6 months, and she was so mad at me at the last visit. She was crying, and I've been with you for 4 months and I've lost 2 pounds, and this is such a weight. And I was like, you are right there. Like, give me one more month, and she came back 6 weeks later and she had lost like 14 pounds. It was just like, we had to get her over that. Like, she was seeing a therapist. She was working on her gut. We had gotten her hormones fixed. It's just like, it doesn't all happen at once,
That's what you're saying all about the different techniques. This is what I've found is that all of the techniques that you've described, and there's so many, meditation, all these things, meditation, in terms of what is the neurocycle, how does it fit into all of that? The neurocycle is the system into which you put the techniques. So all the techniques there's amazing techniques out there. You'll see in my app and my book and everything, working on your gut, those are all different. The point I'm trying to make is that it's like the vehicle, the neurocycle is the vehicle. If you don't follow the system of how the mind, brain, body changes, they can sit in front of you, get all this fantastic advice from you, but if you don't put it into a system where you rewire it into your mind and body network, you won't apply it, and your body won't benefit as much. So all the techniques, if they're going to discipline themselves to follow the techniques you're teaching them, they need to gather awareness. What are the things that you taught me today? Like that lady, what did you tell me today? Gather awareness of those facts. Literally, what are those behaviors that you taught? You're going to work on your gut. You're going to work on this. Those are behaviors. What's your perspective? You're going to shift your perspective. Your mindset is going to be X, Y, and Z. How does that make you feel? How does that? What are you saying? And where do you feel that in your body? Okay, why do you think we should do the second step? Okay, let's put down a list. What are you going to do for you physically? All the things you're telling them. So you put it into that system. Then give them a flow that they can then follow each day and then apply it and then wire it into the brain. And it's not a bunch of facts. It's actual knowledge that they're going to wire in, and it's going to become part of them, and they apply what you teach them.
So I completely agree. What percentage of people do you think in the United States that have anxiety and depression, what percentage of that is really refractory and really needs to be medicated versus people who just need a reset in their mind and some mindfulness work like this? What would you say?
So that's a great question and a big question. So the first thing is that I don't see depression, and the research actually confirms what I'm saying. There's more research confirming this than the biomedical model approach. So the biomedical model says that depression is an illness and that it needs to be treated with medication. So it's kind of like the same approach that medicine uses. Now, it works for medicine, it doesn't work for the mind. And what research has shown is that if you see depression as an illness and you look for a biological cause, which has been disproved, there is not one biological cause for depression. It's not that depression is caused by an imbalance of hormones. You can have an imbalance of hormones which can have a symptom of depression, but that's not the cause. The cause of depression is something going on in your life, and the impact is in your hormones. And so when we shift that, the very first thing to do is to shift that perspective. Otherwise, we're going to go to the traditional, or not even traditional, we're going to go to the biomedical model statistics, which says X amount of people have the illness of depression. Here's what I believe is the correct way of approaching this. Everyone battles with depression. Depression is good. Anxiety is good. They are not bad illnesses. They're not like cancer or something wrong with your thyroid. They are signals telling us that there's a big cause of going on in your life. Something is happening in your life. And it's a signal calling you to pay attention and work through the why behind it. Parallel to that, because you are showing up with this anxiety or depression at certain levels, you need to then work on the biological too. So it's really important to deal with your gut, to deal with your hormones, all that stuff, because whatever you're going through is changing your hormones in the wrong direction and your gut, etc., etc. So you have to deal with both. But if you just deal with the biological and just deal with your gut, then the depression actually will never go away, because the source of the hormone issues is in the symptom of depression, the signal of depression, which is in something going on in your life. If you don't remove the cause, if you don't remove the hand from the hot stove, no matter how many opioids and bandages you put on, it's still going to burn. And so in terms of percentages, all of us battle with depression. What happens is that we're in a society where there's so many contributing factors, where we are able to measure things more, see things more, we've got social media, etc. All these things which are seemingly showing that more people battle with depression that is really bad. Now, when depression gets really bad, so all of us, depression is normal. When depression can move out of the normal range and fall into that range where it's unhelpful, it's kind of now boomeranging back. Like stress is good for us, but bad stress is not good for us. Depression is good for us, but depression that's gone into the toxic zone. So what is that shift? So kind of like what puts us into the bracket of shifting from non-toxic into toxic depression? Well, the answer to that is an unmanaged mind. If we not manage our mind, which doesn't just mean looking at my stress, it's looking at the factors of how I'm showing up with the stress, how I'm showing up, what does my life look like? What am I doing on every aspect? How am I reacting to things? How am I eating? The whole aspect, we've got to stand back and we've got to manage our entire lifestyle. We've got to stand back and take a big, long look at that, and then work in a plan of action on every level, mental and biological, to help manage that. If we don't do that, then it accumulates and our minds start, basically, the conscious mind is very vulnerable. And we have another part of our mind, which is the non-conscious, NON, and that is invincible. But there's a thing between it called the subconscious. And the subconscious is like a waiting room. And the non-conscious is forever giving advice on how to it's all inside of us. Listen to Dr. Cassie. Get your gut right. Eat like this. Do this exercise. Manage that stress. Watch how you react to that relationship. Take your mindset. That is constantly feeding from our non-conscious wisdom, but it's got to get through the subconscious and it's got to get into our conscious mind. Our conscious mind can get really messy, and we can get so messy that we go into this loop of just getting stuck in the messiness. And the longer and then we don't listen to the wisdom. If we can train ourselves to stand back, observe the messy mind, tap into the wisdom of the unconscious mind, then we can fix up the messy mind. If we don't do that and we stay stuck in this, that's when we tip over into the toxic states, and then that creates so much disintegration. In getting stuck in the messy mind is devastating. That's where the anxiety and depression levels go through the roof, and that's where we see the addictions and the into whatever the addictions and the alcoholism and the extreme states and the suicidal ideation and all that kind of stuff happening. And that's why it's so important that we educate people to understand how to recognize where I'm tipping, what to do, and get it, not just doing it in the moment of crisis, but getting people to practice this easy stuff. Practice it with a small argument with someone so that you get a hang of managing your mind and the small things that you can then build up the resilience and have the internal networking. When the big stuff hits, it's going to be hard, but you know how to reach out for help. You know how to start helping yourself.
Yeah, I think those are all wonderful points. And to your point, I tell my patients this all the time. I don't truly think that there is a Zoloft or a Prozac or a citalopram deficiency, right? I think depression is your body telling you that your mind and your bodily wants are not on the same page, right? So like what you truly want in your mind and what your body is doing and what you want and what you're doing are disconnected. And so you need to figure out why. Like that's what I've always told my patients. So, and
To your point, David, sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry. To your point, emphasize that I always say to people when they ask about medication, if you look at the chemical classification of psychotropic drugs, they're not drugs, they're not medications, they're drugs. And medication is targeted to a specific problem, like insulin for diabetes. These are not targeted specifically to a, we hear about serotonin and synapses. It isn't actually what's happening. They are basically numbing. They have a psychoactive effect where they're numbing the brain. So what they do is they provide temporary relief, like ibuprofen. If you've got a headache, you're not lacking ibuprofen, but when you take an ibuprofen, it'll cause a headache. But you don't live on ibuprofen the rest of your life. So people can see those drugs in that sense, as opposed to medication fixing the problem. We wouldn't get all the, it's another whole conversation, but essentially when you take all those drugs as an endocrinologist, you are disrupting the chemistry of the brain and the body, not in the right direction. So long-term use of those is disruptive and not constructive, unfortunately. But you can come off them and you can rewire the brain and body, which is good to know.
yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Caroline Leaf, for explaining to us like what is neuroplasticity and explaining to us this, neurocycle and this process that we have and how we can maybe, how our mind and brain are actually different and what we can do to kind of help break habits, reform habits, things like that. I think that that's very beneficial for people to know. And then, just briefly, do you want to tell people where they can find out more information about you and all the great books that you've done and the different ways that they want to learn from you?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. It's Dr. Caroline Leaf is my website. My social media handle is Dr. Caroline Leaf. I've actually got a new book coming out in August called Help in a Hurry, which is like, what do I do in those moments of crisis? Like help, I need, so that's coming out soon as well, which is really, really great sort of things for what do I do when I'm in a crisis, when I'm having a panic attack. So it's absolute help in the moment. So Dr. Caroline Leaf on my, and Dr. Caroline Leaf is my social media handle. Caroline Leaf, Dr. Caroline Leaf is also the web page. And then my podcast is called Cleaning Up the Mental Mess. And my Neurocycle, the app is called Neurocycle, and that's available on iTunes, Google Play, and there's a web.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this summit episode. And we will see you guys in the next episode.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great chatting to you. Thank you for your great questions.
So that episode was packed full of so many educational things. I love, love, love Dr. Leaf. I hope that now you understand the mind, brain, body connection so much better. You can tell me the difference between your mind, which is the energy of who we are, and your brain, which is the actual organ that responds to things, and the relationship between those two. I hope you understand neuroplasticity better, the 5-step approach to actually, making yourself feel better and getting rid of these toxic thoughts and traits. Also, the 63-day rewiring process, super important. And reframing the narrative around anxiety and depression. I think that we did a great job talking about this. I hope this gives you more insight and helps you feel better, helps you want to find functional medicine providers that can help you incorporate all this into your healing process, because it is a holistic approach. If you're looking for somebody to help you do that, Modern Endocrine has a license in 43 states. We see virtual people. We are happy to help you in this process. Fix your hormones, fix your thyroid, fix your metabolism, fix your gut. So check us out. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, you know somebody who's struggling with anxiety, depression, this is something they need to hear, or they need to get Dr. Leaf's book, please share this episode with them. That is how we help educate others. If you like what we talked about, please leave us a review. Drop anything that you would like for me to talk about on my social media. Let me know, who do you want me to interview? What else do you want to learn? And please join me next week for our next episode of Hormones, Metabolism, and You. Have a lovely week.
The information presented, including any materials discussed, referenced, or linked within this podcast, are for general educational purposes only, not the practice of medicine. No doctor-patient relationship is formed from you listening to this podcast or utilizing any of the information provided. I am a doctor, but I am not talking to you as your doctor. The information provided is not intended to diagnose or treat health problems, or take the place of the professional medical care provided by your doctor. If you are experiencing any health problems, including problems you believe have been touched upon in any respect within this podcast, you should consult your doctor about the problems without delay. You may ask your doctor whether he or she believes the information I have provided would be helpful to you, but you should still consult your doctor immediately and follow his or her medical advice as your treating physician. I'm just here to provide you basic knowledge about the issues we discuss so you are more aware of them and can better discuss them with your doctor. That's why we call it Back to the Basics. Join me on the next episode as we continue our journey.